I'm not a professional in IT. I'm not a person who lives on internet 24 hours a day, but I'm a user of the internet. So my talk will be a personal perspective as a concerned citizen with business interests. So I'm trying to make it very clear where I come from so that you know what my biases are and what my leanings are towards. I would like to just address a few issues which have concerned me for the last few years regarding internet in general, and of course the corollary and ancillary industries which have come up with that. I would like to start off by the question of access. You see, in a country like India, when we pre-liberalization, pre-Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao days, if you recall, we were a considerably more closed society than what we are now today. Everything was kind of controlled, and those choices were limited, and we had to kind of take what we could get. A simple thing like a telephone, you had to kind of book it and wait for your turn to come, and you got that magnificent black machine which could be used as a weapon of mass destruction if thrown properly. And then finally we moved on to the situation where we have mobile phones now. Kind of just put yourself in that period. What was the situation then? We had only one state company providing telecom, one state company manufacturing those instruments, and we had to be at the mercy of the local telephone operator, the unit, the branch which used to supply you the connection, etc. If you wanted to make a trunk call, that was what's called a trunk call in those days, you had to book it, and you wait for it to mature, and it will come to you sometime at 2 in the night, and you'll have to make the phone call. From that situation, we have now progressed to this, where almost every one of us has at the least one mobile phone. Some of us have more than one mobile phone. But the basic control factor has not changed. I would like you to ponder over this. By control in this instance, I do not mean the control of the process of manufacturing or the control of giving you technical connections or the instrument itself or the content. I'm talking about the control in terms of who are the people who are controlling these companies. In India, the largest telephone operators now are Airtel, Vodafone, Idea, etc., etc. Have any of you thought what is the ownership pattern of these companies? We are blissfully ignorant about it. We choose not to question that. I would like you to think a little bit more on that. Any major corporations in the world, it has been proven, any student of history will tell you, corporations by their very nature are acquisitive. By their very nature, they like to extend their control. The same is true here also. We may pat ourselves on the back and say Idea is Indian, Airtel is Indian, and Vodafone is foreign, or whatever it is. But the true structure is something which needs your examination. There are multiple interests involved here, not necessarily for the good of India or Indian citizens. Some of them, yes, but some not necessarily so. But it's completely opaque. I would like you to think about that. We are told that internet has flattened the structure of governance. That's a common phraseology one hears. Largely it is true. But once again, it requires you to have a little application of your mind. As we are told, and my earlier distinguished speakers have mentioned to you, that internet started off more or less as an American defense project, then kind of went to the universities and the civilians, etc. And because of historic reasons, a certain degree of primacy has been maintained in America. I don't see anything intrinsically wrong with that, because of course they started it, so they have maintained their primacy. But that begs the question, what are we going to do a decade from now, 2 decades from now? When is that primacy going to be flattened? Is it being flattened? I would like you to think about that. The next question I would like to raise is question of pricing. Those of you who have a mobile phone, the pricing is now within reach of most common people. You will see the rickshawala having a mobile phone. You see even the vegetable vendor having a mobile phone. Obviously, it's affordable. Nobody questions that. But my question is, if you travel with your mobile phone abroad, and God forbid you forget to switch off the 3G part of it, and then when you come back after a visit, then you see the phone bill you have. An average phone bill of 2,000 becomes 20,000. Just 1 week's travel abroad, and that's what will happen to you. My question is, I believe all of you agree with me when I say that light is one of the fastest traveling medium, whatever you want to call it, and electricity, all this, it doesn't really matter whether you switch on the light here or there. It's the same cost of production of electricity, same cost of transmission of information. So why on earth should it cost you 10 times or 20 times or 100 times, whatever it is, to speak from here to that room, from here to London? Why are we not raising our voices against this? This is nothing but banditry. It's absolute banditry. That's what it is. We have to question it. We don't. We are like sheep. I would like you to think about that. The question of net neutrality comes in. People are talking about net neutrality. Now, what does net neutrality mean? To me, as a layman, I would like to interpret it this way, that if I want to access the net, I should be free to access any part of the net, any place I go. I should not be forced to pay a certain extra fee because the service provider is bundling certain things into it. And then I'm forced to buy something which I don't want. In the olden days, when the telephone was there, the company had to provide you a telephone, and you could get the telephone call from any other telephone in the country. Here, now they're trying to insert some kind of break, some kind of, what should I say, stations which will filter what you can get, what you can access, and the pricing at which you will be able to get that. This is another aspect which I would like you to ponder about. The next issue which I would like you to consider is the question of censorship. It was briefly touched upon earlier. The moment you get into this dangerous area of censorship, it's a no-end street, because today, what is unacceptable to you may be acceptable to somebody else, and what is acceptable to him may not be acceptable to you. So who are you to decide? As rightly said, we should leave it to our self-policing. But in the real world, that situation is not there as yet. If you go to some of the airports in our own country and you try to access, some websites, I'm not talking about objectionable websites. I'm just talking about informational websites. You'll be amazed at how many websites are not accessible in our own airports. You don't have to go to whichever country you were mentioning, where Rajnesh was mentioning about somebody not being able to access YouTube, etc. Public domain in our country. Next time you fly, please just at random pick up some websites. You won't be able to access it. Now, who's exercising that control? Who's deciding that it is not meant for the common citizen to see? I'm not sure. So there is some lack of control in terms of the organization behind it. They're allowing these things to happen probably with or without their consent. The next point I would like you to consider about is the question of the other languages apart from English. Now, we have talked about 300 million users in India. I can assure you that all 300 million are not using it in English. They are using probably every possible language that you can think of in India. Similarly, the Chinese are using mostly Chinese, and that's a large population. The question here is, what is the ease of translation for those of us who would like to know what's going on in the other languages? Is it that easy, or do we need to go that extra distance? I would like you to think about that. And finally, this is my personal, I would say, pet peeve of internet. I mean, this has been irritating me for a long time, and I'm not sure if you share that irritation, but what I find most irritating about it is the lack of control of information about yourself. Whatever you have done in the past, when you were in the kindergarten, also keeps popping up now. I'm not sure if that is something which is something to be admired. I think there should be some kind of consensus view on that you must be able to do something about it. I read newspaper reports or people asking them to, erase their memory from Google or whatever it is, but it's not happening in a what should I say, standardized manner. Each one has to take up a challenge and do it. How many of us have the patience and intelligence to follow through? These are some of the points I would like to share with you, ladies and gentlemen. As I told you in the beginning, mine is only a personal perspective. And these are some of the concerns. So having said all this, let me be the first to say that thank God there's internet. Because without that, we would be in those days of those telephone instruments that I mentioned earlier. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Bharat Epur. I'm surprisingly in agreement with the first part of his observations about pricing and so on, because all these relate to telecom business practices about which we completely agree. And on other points, I would like Raj to briefly respond to some of his observations.
So, Mr. Epur covered quite a few things, and in fact, I think we should just let him speak and not worry about any of us speaking about internet governance. What I know is, I sat listening there to you, sir, I thought, I liked how you put the caveat at the beginning that these are your personal observations as an internet user, not as a businessman or any other role. And that really sort of emphasized what I had said earlier, that the value of the internet is how we use it and what it does for us and how we contribute back in how we use the internet. Now, in terms of some of the issues that you raised, I guess one of the ones that's the most, or which has been, at least in the policy circles, been discussed of late, is this issue about the right to be forgotten. And whilst you were saying what you were saying, as you know, in Europe in particular, they're a bit strong on their privacy and citizen right issues and so on. The Europeans have had some success, if you like, where they've asked Google, for example, to remove references to a person from any search results. But on the other side of it, if you think through it, and this actually came up yesterday in the event I was at as well, a lot of us use services which are free. Gmail is free, and I say free in quotes. Facebook is free, Twitter is free, etc., etc., etc. But that free does come at a cost, and the cost is your privacy. Information about you, what you do, what you view, who you connect with, who you talk with, who you communicate with. Because the companies use that information to actually make money. So the service is given to you free, but the money they make is, of course, selling your advertisements or looking at your behavior online and trying to sell that information to someone else, or et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to answer how we're going. I mean, technically it's quite a difficult task as well, because you're visible on so many different platforms: Twitter account, Facebook account, Google Plus, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. And to be completely erased from all of those, there's a bit of a challenge there. But to my mind, the bigger question is, what is, when we subscribe to these services, yes, we may do so in good faith or under peer pressure because all your friends are on Facebook and you need to be on so you can share and so on and so forth. In fact, David had a great example earlier this afternoon about, was it F4, was it? Yeah, maybe you can talk about that a bit later, David, which I found quite interesting. It was an interesting use of social networks to basically form relationships. So, but going back to the question I asked was, what is the balance between the free services and you using that service? I don't think there's any definitive answer. I think it depends on the person. A lot of people I know, for example, choose not to use Facebook. Why? Because they don't believe it offers them the privacy and the controls that they require of it. I have some other friends who, on the other hand, say, I don't care about privacy. If there's something I'm going to post which I don't want anyone else to know, I won't post it in the first place. So there's also that bit. In all of this, I think education is the key. Each person, each one of us is responsible for what we do online. If you don't want bad things to be said about what you posted online, don't say something silly in the first place. But perhaps it's something that we can discuss with the rest of the room. I think it's an interesting issue. The other one that's a bit dear to my heart is the issue raised about telecom charges. So I must make a confession here. I am a telecom engineer by training. One of the first startups I did was a telecom-oriented company. So I have profited from that, but not from roaming charges, unfortunately, because if I had, I would have been a much richer man today. In those days, we didn't have all that. It's an interesting dilemma, I think. There are many ways in which we can perhaps look at reducing charges, particularly in the roaming arena. And I know, for example, I travel quite a lot. So for a very long time, my monthly phone bills were through the roof. I mean, there were literally thousands of dollars in phone bills every month because I go to so many countries every month, and each country has its own set of charges, and incoming is so much. Just because you send a video, a picture on your Twitter, it's so much, and etc. It just goes on and on. However, recently, after I moved back to Australia, so Australia is home for me, and I'd been living in Singapore for a couple of years. So when I moved back, I decided to have a look around to see which mobile plan I should take up. My criteria for choosing the mobile plan was not how much it would cost me for using it within Australia, but how much it would cost me to use it when I'm roaming overseas. Now, with the provider I've gone with, my typical monthly bill with the same level of traveling, in fact, I would say even more, is roughly around $300 a month. And that's quite extensive use of data plans, of mobile incomings and outgoings and whatnot. The reason is I've gone with a provider who charges me 50 cents a megabyte cumulative anywhere I am traveling overseas. So 50 cents a megabyte is very cheap. In fact, there are some countries which don't offer that price within the country, let alone you being able to roam pretty much anywhere across the world. If I make a phone call, it's 50 cents to receive an incoming call, and I think it's $1 to make a call out. All that has significantly reduced my phone bill. So the question I asked myself was, if this company can do it, how come the others can't do it? In Australia, the company that I'm with is not the incumbent. But in Singapore, that company is the incumbent. So in Singapore, Singtel owns a company in Australia called Optus. So I'm with Optus in Australia. And their international roaming charges is what I've just described to you. But in Singtel, I also have a Singapore phone number. In Singapore, I am not with Singtel, the owner of Optus. I am with StarHub, because they provide better rates. So it's very subjective, depending on the country you are in. As the incumbent, it's protecting its market share. But when it enters a different market, it's there to compete with the incumbent in that market. Therefore, Singtel is happy to drastically reduce its charges and compete, fight tooth and nail to get customer share. So what I think that tells us that the power really lies within the consumer. If we vote with our feet, in other words, if we say we don't like your service, it's too expensive, I'm going to go find something else. But a lot of us, in Australia, we call it the lazy tax. And that is, when time comes for renewal of your insurance policies or with your telephone company, you don't really look at what you're paying, but you keep on paying every month, every year, because you've been doing it for so long. hence the lazy text. You don't do a little bit of research to see, is there something better in the market? Because there's also perhaps an issue of trust. You get to trust because you've been with them for so long. But what I've realized, particularly when it comes to insurance companies, but as well telecom companies, trust doesn't really exist. You to them are a customer that gives them money every month, and they will try and maximize every cent out of you. But again, that's also how business runs. So, so sometimes I'm in a bit of a dilemma myself, because at heart I'm a capitalist. I come from the business world, right? In recent times, I've decided to not do that much work in business, and then I'm with the Internet Society. But commercial decisions have to be made as well, but at the same time, I think there's also a balance that can be reached on providing value to the customer. I've spoken too long. Thanks.
Oh, no. Okay. And sir, we would like to have every one of your concerns addressed, and also some of those points we would like to take up and work on, like the roaming prices and so on.